All right, we're getting pretty close. I think we'll go ahead and kick things off here at the January 2026 Resuscitation Academy webinar. Thanks everybody for joining and welcome to 2026 and to the RA webinar. We've got a really special guest today, local guy here in the Seattle area and a big friend of the Resuscitation Academy. Also, a kindred spirit of mine as a fellow born and raised Hoosier from the great state of Indiana. Although Michael had sort of a really confusing track through his education prior to moving to the Northwest, where went to Indiana University for undergraduate. And those of you who are from Indiana or have been around there will understand that going to graduate school then at Purdue is like committing the cardinal sin from the state of Indiana. You can't cross that line. But somehow you managed to do it and do it successfully, Michael. Later got an MBA here at the University of Washington in the Foster School business. Michael went on to work a few different places throughout the industry. GlaxoSmithKline for a start, and then a little company around here named Philips, where he was started really diving into healthcare, and then really worked on his chops as a product manager at Physio Control, and then Stryker, and was product manager for a number of different products. I was looking at some of your background stuff, CodeStat, LifeNet, the Lucas 3. I think that's when you and I met, was when you were
Yeah.
working on the Lucas 3 project,
Yeah.
and then went on to do some work on straightening out the power cots for a while with Stryker. So pretty awesome stuff. Michael now works for a company here in the Seattle area called Spur Reply that does various different consulting operations, and really is just a true friend of the RA. Michael's a board member at HeartSight, and I asked him today to kind of join us and talk a little bit about his journey through the world of out-of-hospital cardiac arrest and sort of share with us his story. And I'll let you take it from there, Michael. Thank you so
All
much
right.
for joining us.
Yeah, of course. Thank you. Great to be here. Hello, everybody. Good afternoon, good morning, good night, wherever you all might be. Let me get this pulled up here. All right. You should be able to see kind of my floating head and the thing back here. So I'm gonna get started. Yeah, so I'm Michael Arbuck, and yeah, I think that I kind of call this talk thoughts from the other side, and I think it'll start to make a little more sense as we get through it. I'll walk a little bit through, yeah, again, my background, and Andy, you actually probably did a better job of my background than I will do with my background. Then we'll talk about the event, and then really the things that cascade from that. So recovery, success factors, and last but certainly not least, yeah, final thoughts on this never-ending challenge and battle that you all are faced with every day in some capacity. Yeah, so I mean, from a background standpoint, in some regard, I'm very much a I don't know, sort of a typical Pacific Northwest guy. I moved out to Seattle from Indiana in 2007, and hiking, camping, outdoorsy stuff. There in the top left, you see Katie, who's my wife now. She becomes a main character in the story here pretty soon. And then from a professional standpoint, Andy, you touched on this a bit, but at first I didn't quite know what I was doing in undergrad. I was thinking I'd do med school. That path didn't work out, I think, all for the better. And so I started
It's a
really,
rough path, Michael. I'm glad you didn't go down it. You have to be sitting here next to me now, hosting this RA webinar
yeah,
with me.
I hear that from a lot of people.
You made the right
Um,
choice.
yeah, exactly. So, I really moved into healthcare, and I was able to get a job with Philips out of business school. Worked with them for a couple of years in interventional cardiology, working on a kind of robotic PCI system called Corindus CorePath. I think they're now owned by Siemens actually, but at one point they were a startup and they were a partnership with Philips, and I was kind of the go-between sort of product manager, do-it-all person. And then yeah, transition over to Physio Control, which ultimately became Stryker. But yeah, Andy, as you mentioned, worked on a CodeStat and LifeNet and Lucas and True CPR, and helped out with some LifePack things. So I was pretty ingrained in yeah, in resuscitation and in cardiac care and all those things. And you see Pulse Point there as well. I was a product manager there when, at the time, Physio had a kind of a relationship with Pulse Point to help distribute that app around. So, kind of from all different aspects, whether it's kind of interventional cardiology, whether it's, in the field, whether it's, digital tools. I've sort of been, I was in the field. I was in it. Then I actually transitioned and moved to a consulting firm in early 21. And then then things took up a slight yeah, detour, alternate route, if you will. I myself actually had a cardiac arrest. So you see there, it was November 16th of, I guess at this point, it's 3.5 years, 3 and change years ago. And what I'll do is I'll kind of walk everybody through, yeah, that's sort of the timeline, the details of what happened, and then how I'm still here, walking, talking, and well, at this point I'm sitting, but I do walk and talk. So. Um, yeah, we'll kind of just jump right into it. Honestly, so it was the early morning that you can see there, about 4:30 in the morning. Um, I, we were sleeping, and I woke up my partner with some serious agonal breathing. I've since having attended many of the RAs, listening to the 911 calls, really listening to what does that sound like? And that being, more than a snore. But obviously, when I woke up, Katie, she was like, okay, he's snoring. This is annoying. It's the middle of the night. Like, dude, hey, wake up. She kind of elbowed me. Um, and I wasn't really responsive. And what she says is I kind of, I sort of got in the recovery position in bed, sort of on my elbows and knees, and then just collapsed. And I'll tell the story here because I think it's a little funny. Right after, sort of right as I was collapsing, there was a slight fart that came out, and Katie, she laughed hysterically at it. And then she will also say, when you didn't laugh, I realized that there was really something wrong.
Mhm.
And okay, that's a comedic piece, but it's a telltale sign of like, look, all these things are pointing to something is wrong. And so she quickly turned on the lights, realized things were wrong, and called 911. And I've since pulled the 911 call and the run sheet to really get all this data from there that you're seeing here. So called 911, and you can start to see here as you think about what the mission of the RA and the chain of survival, and start to think how all these pieces start to fall into place. But within 40 seconds of receiving the 911 call, so that includes validating the address and what kind of building, et cetera, the started TCPR. So the dispatcher said, all right, I need you to get him off the bed if he's on it, which I was on. And so Katie grabbed me by my ankles and yanked me off the bed. Fortunately, we had carpeting in the bedroom, so my head had a bit of a cushion for the land, and started CPR. And so the dispatcher talked her through, was like, okay, put your hands in the middle of the chest and press hard and fast. And we've listened to the 911 call as well since, and you can kind of hear him going push, push, push. This again to set this cadence for her, who she's not done CPR training. I think there was some lifeguard experience in high school, but I don't even know if that counts. And so, yeah, she started telephone CPR. Again, within 40 seconds, you can see the units that got assigned. The really nice thing for us is we live so close to Station 6, where all these units were coming from. And so, within 4 minutes, ladder 3 was on scene. And that's kind of when the call ends, obviously, because they were then at the door. Fortunately, we had a friend actually staying with us from out of town. And so she was able to run downstairs. We were in kind of just your typical Seattle kind of townhouse, sort of 3 floors, skinny bedrooms on the top floor. So she was able to run down and open the door while Katie resumed CPR. And so yeah, then the whole host of everybody, A10 eventually arrived on scene as well. The everybody showed up up to the third floor, and they took over doing CPR. So you can see at the bottom, I got 4 complete rounds of CPR, and then one shock with ROSC. And then, yeah, getting, stabilized on scene. You can see first pass success there. I think that's all everybody loves to see that. Um, and you can see there as well in the bottom right, the screen grab I grabbed from the kind of security camera of our house. So you can see, so I'm on the cot, medics around me. I sort of recognize my head and my hair in this in the image. And then then transported to again for those that are familiar with the area to Virginia Mason. For those that aren't, it's up one of the hospitals very very close by, and so I think there was one sort of person ahead of me in the ER overall. And so being able to get whisked in and again to get that transition of care and to get that definitive care on the hospital side, cooled, cathed, no blocks. Ejection fraction was not performing well. That recovered within about 24 hours. But this is kind of this is the very, very acute event. We'll talk about things afterwards, but I think the one thing I like to point out, and again, as we start to think about success and the system overall, you know, recognizing that something is wrong from Katie's standpoint and making the call very, very quickly, that happened very, very fast. Of course, the dispatcher CPR starting extremely fast, again, 40 seconds, quick arrival on scene from professional responders, getting Rosk on the first shock. That always helps the odds. Again, first pass intubation success is always great. The ejection fraction is low, but that as I mentioned, that did recover. So, I was taken I was basically in a coma for less than a day, about 18 hours or so. But in the meantime, so you can see there, the one of the heroes of this whole story, Katie, both my parents live out of town. So my mom was in Oregon. My dad lives in Indiana still. She called them. They flew in that night, sort of that day. And then, we kind of really got into recovery. You can see my friend sent kind of a fruit basket and gives you a bit of sense of kind of honestly, the really important piece that I mentioned here in a little bit is the sort of this bubble of support that I had outside of all the professional help that arrived, right? Is having friends and family and this support. And, Katie had like emailed my manager, was like, hey, some stuff went down. Michael's not coming to work. To handle all these administrative things that could obviously be, could be very stressful or be an issue. And again, as I start to reflect on kind of recovery, and so I was in the hospital for 7 days. Um, my take on thinking back on that week is it was comfortable. The Katie and my parents will say, you were agitated because you were confused. There's this goldfish memory piece. Like I would sort of ask the same questions, understand the answer, and then ask the same thing 15 minutes later. And they're like, okay, like, and I would get frustrated because I was sort of wouldn't understand what's going on sometimes. Like, why am I here? What's happening? But my perception of that event is being comfortable and sort of, I'm in a bed, there's food and snacks and people I'm familiar with. Um, the visual distortions was an interesting one. I had this, for probably a week and a half, kind of my field of vision was sort of kind of stretched and twisted a bit. I don't know why it resolved quickly thereafter. The Foley is on here because I think the urology department got maybe a little bit aggressive that I had to wear Foley for another I think 2 weeks after discharge. But again, it's a convenient thing if you don't really need to be walking around too much. I have this memory of getting my MRI in the hospital that right around discharge, of it being sort of very much of this 2001 Space Odyssey, kind of the ending scene of this like no, very very trippy, even though I was told I was on no drugs. And I mentioned the goldfish memory that I would ask the same questions, I would tell the same jokes. I've got the yellow fall risk socks. Obviously, I have the bracelet, and I think I'm making a joke of like, "Hey, I'm a fall risk." Maybe I'd be better, less of a risk in the summertime or something like that. And okay, people kind of chuckle and go, okay, that's Michael, all right. And I'd sort of say the same thing, fall risk, I'm more risk in the springtime. And they're like, oh, this is kind of strange because it's him, but he's sort of on this short-term repeat. Um, that took a little, that went away fairly quickly. So, and then once I was discharged, that started really the mental recovery piece, right? The week one is really the physical, like, okay, am I there? Am I functioning? Day 7 and on, probably really for the first year is this mental recovery of, yeah, fatigue. I took a lot of naps early on, getting used to having ICD. So I had an ICD implanted and just of that being a thing. Like that's now part of my life. And yeah, just being aware of it and sometimes not caring and sometimes thinking about it quite a bit. My chest hurt for 3 weeks, or sorry, 3 months. So thank you to Katie and honestly Seattle Fire for that because that the obviously high quality CPR. I was able to get back into physical activity pretty quickly. I think I was skating, kind of again, not in the hockey game, but just kind of skating around within the first couple of weeks. Again, really exhausted, but just really starting to flex my just muscles and figure out how my yeah, how is all this working? Going through the executive function piece, I went to Virginia Mason and did all these different tests to evaluate against spatial and reasoning and make sure that that I was recovering appropriately from a neurological standpoint. And then after 3 months of work that I was able to have off from work, to go back to work and kind of get back into just doing the things that I was doing before. And then, and honestly, the last piece I think is critical and is something that I think is honestly probably still ongoing, sort of from becoming aware of it around a year after the cardiac arrest to really embracing it now is the emotional recovery. There was a probably I don't know 6 months, maybe even a year or more of this. I kind of call it emotional fog, where things were it sort of felt like if you take the TV and you turn the contrast down, from 100 down to 70, like you're like, yeah, I think there's color there, but it feels more black and white. It has this sort of this more muted experience to it. This bullet point you see there, future horizon, that I think I came up with. It sort of, how do I envision how far into the future can I see or think or plan? And initially that was very, very near. It would be a couple days of like, all right, tomorrow I'm gonna go for a walk and maybe I'll go skate and I got to take these 16, different pills I have to take. And so this horizon slowly started to expand to where like, okay, like we can plan a trip in 3, 4 months. And that it took quite a while to get to a place where I was comfortable thinking that way. And it's not that I couldn't think beyond it. It's just I think I don't know, maybe my body and my mind and sort of emotionally just it didn't seem like there was anything there to plan yet. I had to sort of establish the core that I was in now is again how I have thought about it. Um, I've actually started seeing a therapist who I still see now to help with I got quite depressed. I drank a bunch and I gained a bunch of weight. And just trying to sort of process this whole thing. And I think the really important part too here is the, you know, the event I went through is very, very different than the event that Katie and my parents went through and that the medics went through. My experience starts, day 5 or so in the hospital without some of this, obviously very dire situation, um, but also dealing with these my own, I wouldn't call them demons, but my own thoughts and feelings about it that is very difficult to convey. So even though on paper the event happened, at that time to sort of everybody in the inner circle, everybody had really different paths to dealing with it. And I think that's part of the things I sort of learned to going through therapy is like there's, same event, but very, very different paths to coping with it. And then really getting through, within the last probably couple of years of really starting to feel like myself and a better version of myself and really embracing this event that I've been through. And so again, now starting to think about, okay, success factors, like what, we unfortunately know that, the cardiac arrest does not result in favorable outcomes for the majority of people that are involved in that. And so thinking about, my situation and what allowed, me to come out the other end, with what I was joke about with no new deficiencies. And really it's kind of some things I coined here, sort of, T to Katie, time to Katie. Um, that's a critical success factor for her to realize in the middle of the night, hey, there's something is wrong. I can't fix this. I need to call 911 and get help outside of this environment that I'm in. Time to Tony CPR. So Tony was the 911 dispatcher that started CPR, that kind of walked Katie through, hey, what's going on here? Being close to a fire station, if they're rolling out and they're at your house in 4 minutes, that all helps, compress that 10-minute kind of success window that we're all fighting for. Uh, of course, all the training from Seattle Fire, and I have hard and soft skills on here because I'll mention this a little bit in kind of Katie's piece, but being in the room while they're working CPR, they get ROSC, and to have the medic lean over to Katie and say, like, look, getting getting rhythm back on the first shock is a good indication. Providing these soft skills, this bedside manner, if you will, in addition to, of course, all the hard skills and all the things that need to get done from a true medical care standpoint, these soft skills are also critical, really for Katie as she was going through this. Being very close to a hospital certainly helped to get me into, get me get me cooled, get me stabilized and taken care of. The ER protocols and collaboration, I put this on here. So both my parents are actually physicians. They're not trauma physicians, they're not emergency physicians, but nonetheless, my dad would sort of recommend, and they kind of worked together. They didn't say, look, we got this. They sort of said, oh, that's a good idea. Let's work with this. Here's what the team is thinking and saying. So, that was critical, for my outcome potentially, but also for the general milieu of that my parents and Katie were in. And I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but family and friends, having waking up and having a home to go to, and knowing that kind of there's food in the fridge and I'm taken care of, and people figured out the pharmacy and the meds and all the appointments that need to be set up in the first few months. Like, that is critical, because without that, I'd be like a kid. I'd be lost. And the other thing, thinking about these success factors, as we think about sort of, what is, Resuscitation Academy, really championing and driving and within the mission, this chain of survival, you can see that it actually impacts the vast majority of these success factors that allowed me to have a very, very positive outcome, right? Time to Katie. So all the community awareness, CPR training, AED training, placing AEDs in public places, that all drives this awareness to, like, something's wrong. I gotta call for help. Obviously all the work done with TCPR to train up, to run metrics, to again measure, improve. That certainly was a massive help. To get CPR started in 40 seconds is pretty phenomenal. Now, okay, where fire stations are built, maybe that's not as acute of a thing to be able to influence, but there's certainly some impact there with, again, looking at data, right? Measuring and improving. What's your coverage? How do we improve our coverage area for whatever area it is that you're covering? Of course, all the training skills, working with local hospitals so that the handoff, this transition of care is strong, is critical. And family and friends, I think for me is very, very similar to this, to T to Katie, is this community outreach, this community engagement, driving awareness, all these educational programs, whether it's, communities or schools or churches or sporting events, what have you. All these things contribute to all of these. And again, I think this highlights this, the survival chain. It's not any one piece, it's all of these pieces coming together to, yeah, for me to be able to be a numerator and to be able to share my story with all of you. This slide, generally if we do this talk and Katie's able to join is kind of her, her slide, and I'll try to do as best I can of telling her story. But this on the left is, kind of jokingly and in reality kind of how she was during the situation, right? I mean, everything's on fire, but this is fine, and you have to sort of have your know-it-all to call 911, yank somebody off the bed, do CPR, communicate, and be able to handle all of that, and to come out the other end and do and be stronger, honestly. Um, and again, from her standpoint, I've mentioned some of these is really, Tony. So again, the dispatcher's kind of his instructions and guidance. In the 911 call, he's very calm. He's very specific on the thing he's saying, so that it's a sort of, it's not an order, but it's a very specific kind of action, and it's a one thing that she can focus on. There's the leaning. So he also at one point, a couple of minutes in the CPR said, "Hey, make sure you come off the chest." Because again, certainly, in that situation, people just want to, they want to pump, and maybe they're doing the right, rate and depth, but if they're not coming off the chest, getting blood back into the heart so that you can then reperfuse is limited. So, as soon as he told her, hey, come off make sure you come off the chest in between compressions, she actually noticed some perfusion kind of in my face, a little bit of color coming back. And again, that's a positive sign back to her. Hey, I'm doing the right things. This person is helping me do the right things. Certainly a quick arrival and action of the medics and an engine team, and the aid car, and then sorry, and then the medics coming on board, and explaining again. I talked about the bedside manner, but saying like, hey, here's kind of what we're doing. Hey, that's a positive indication of based on what's happening. Like, this is a positive thing. ER selection, when they were in the ambulance on the way out, there's a couple options. And I think, the medics were like, hey, we're going to go to this other ER because there's nobody there. And um, we think that's going to be better. Fantastic. Let's do that. The reunification. So I think a couple months afterwards, had some conversations with the Seattle Fire PIO on doing the reunification, going to the station and meeting up with the team. And honestly, I initially I sort of was, I, I didn't want to be a burden, to be honest. I was like, look, I don't want to come in there and be like, hey, this, like, yay. Like, I didn't want to do that. But then as I sort of thought about that more and more, right, realizing that, look at and I'm sure there's plenty of firefighters on the call and medics on the call, is you deal with a lot of shit. Like, you deal with people kind of at their worst day, and oftentimes you don't get to see positive results. And if you do, maybe you don't hear about those. And so that kind of shifted my framing to like, let me go and be a kind of a, I don't know, a good example of like the hard work and all the tough things that you have to go through, to be it does matter. Like, there is a positive impact, and it's not all dark and grim, that there are serious impacts to the community and the people and the people's lives. And so that was a really strong moment for us to go. And we brought as much sort of candied carved sugar as we could, and sparkling waters and all of this, to again have that connection with the teams. And also for Katie, the kind of the trauma counselor, while she was still in the hospital, my mom kind of recommended, said, hey, you talk to a trauma counselor, get started on this path, because there's a lot here to unpack. And so that was really, really helpful for her to just, to talk through, because as I mentioned before, right, she went through a very different experience in some sense, right? This what's going to happen? Is it good? Is it bad? What's going to happen, and how do I deal with all this sort of her personal trauma related to all this? And that's been fantastic for her. It's been fantastic for us and our relationship, and for me as well. That these are really the key things that, from her standpoint, were critical in allowing her to, sort of perform at the time, but also then, kind of, thrive and blossom after the fact as well. Well, I'll kind of shift a little bit here to say, after, after the event, we actually got a call from Katie, got a call from Dr. Sayer. he as he reviews the code stat reports and he says, as he tells it, he goes, I know this name, and I had interacted, with Andy um, uh, and the group from Seattle Fire on numerous occasions with Lucas things and CodeStat things, and again obviously with physical control and the striker being in the backyard, we're always looking for how do we connect. So I'd worked with Dr. Sayer, and he kind of said, I know this name, let me call, and he called Katie and said, hey, I've got the run report, and if I know Michael, he's going to want all that information. And so again, getting connected into, reconnected, if you will, with Seattle Fire and Resuscitation Academy, that got connected with HeartSight. And so HeartSight's really this nonprofit that's run by a doc out of Columbia that's really focused on really the after clinical care. Like what you can see some of the screen grabs here, like what's going on? What can I expect? These lived experience stories written by people that have gone through this, and whether it's you can see up top, whether it's survivor, co-survivor, et cetera. You can scan the QR code, go to the website. There's a lot of really good resources here, whether it's for something that you've experienced, something maybe you may experience, or for if you know someone that's kind of been in this world. There's some really, really nice tools and just articles to read through at your own pace. That I'd like to sort of promote this because I think it's a wonderful resource for anyone in any sphere related to cardiac arrest. So honestly, some final thoughts. I mean, since this event, Katie and I got married. I know Andy always jokes and says, "Well, it's about time."
Amen, brother.
We got married, and we've been on some incredible trips around the world. We sort of went to Wales and Japan, and we did a Costa Rica thing. We went to Jordan just in August. And obviously got married. And I think that the fun one is we also are now expecting a girl in June. That is unfortunately just her butt and legs, but what can you do? I think it's a great photo. So ultimately, really, kind of from the more joking to the really more serious is every piece of the survival chain is critical. And I hope you've seen that kind of throughout some of the pieces of my story. In each of those pieces, they need to be, nurtured and measured and improved, and nurtured and measured and improved over and over and over again. And last, but certainly not least, whatever it is that you do in this field, it matters. Every single one of it matters, whether it's frontline, whether it's IT, whether it doesn't matter, whether it's policy, it all matters because it all helps put this chain together so that people like me can benefit from all the hard work that everybody does. And as it says on there, thank you certainly never feels enough, but yeah, just a big thank you to you and everything that you do and wake up for honestly every day. And then this last piece is you can see this is at the reunification that I talked about. So this is us with the team, their ladder 3, and then the bottom left there's Tony, the 911 dispatcher that walked Katie through probably the worst phone call of her life. So that's my story. I'm happy to field any questions, and Andy, as I told you kind of offline, nothing's off limits. So if you guys have questions about anything, everything, I'm open book. No, nothing's too sensitive. Happy to field them. You can email me if you don't want to ask here.
One quick ask, can you go back to the QR code?
Yes, absolutely.
I think it was partially behind your head.
Oh,
There we go. That's perfect.
Okay.
I think it should scan now. So we'll just leave that up there for a
Let me do
minute or two.
that.
Oh, there you go. You disappeared. Thank you,
I'm still
Michael.
here.
That was fantastic. And congratulations.
Thank you.
We'll have to find a baby size Resuscitation Academy onesie and get it headed your way. That's awesome. I'm so happy for you guys. So
I'll take it.
congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you.
Dr. Ray has joined us. Tom, anything you want to kick off here with
Well, like you say, Michael, again, I've heard your story before, and it is a powerful story, and it is one of many. As you point out, I think every story is different, and that's important. I guess one question I have, right? So there is this uh, collective effort, and it makes sense just intuitively to have these post-discharge medical resources, right? To have people engage with the psychologist and or other mental health, uh, cardiology and primary care, all of these services, right, to gather around and provide uh, involvement and help people, return to their lives. But I guess none of this. Well, this is my ignorance. Much of this is not evidence based, and so the challenge is how to get payers to support what seems like a useful idea, but which quite honestly, it's hard to know what makes the most difference. And so I wonder, Michael, if you reflect, was there something about your medical experience after your discharge? Was there a particular provider or clinic that you thought was most useful? Or were they all, you talked about the different providers, or were they all just part of the solution for you? But some people, it feels like you just discharge them and away they go and you never see them again. And other people really need a lot of involvement. So I'm just trying to gauge what service you felt was most important in your recovery.
Uh, yeah, so that's a good question. I think any service would be beneficial because I think to your point, if I wasn't already kind of orbiting the resuscitation world, I probably would have just shot off into my own and continued things on my own. But because I was sort of in this orbit, I was able to then connect with Dr. Sayer and then connected with Richard Price from Pulse Point. He connected me with some survivors, and then getting connected with Anne and getting connected with Heartsight. It it being so it's sort of funny because I think the answer is yes, all of it, because they're little pieces. I don't think there was any one thing that was the definitive that made things easier. I think having survivors to talk to, having family, other survivors to talk to and tell my story to, having the data for me was useful to look at the numbers and understand like the details of everything that happened. Like having access, I think maybe that's the key piece, is having access to all of it. For me, I certainly, picked and chose the ones that were most interesting to me. But I think you're right in that a lot of people maybe don't even know that that's there. The reunification piece, even having worked in resuscitation, I was still very hesitant. I was like, I don't want to bother them, but that was a very, very meaningful moment. And so it's almost like you sort of have to force all these options on people afterwards to say like, it will be good for you, and if it feels uncomfortable, because people want to hear your story, they want to learn from you, they want to use you as an example for all the work that they're doing. That's sort of selling the numerators, if you will, is not as a burden, but as a great example of all the things that do work well. I don't know if that helps kind of address that a little bit.
Yeah, I think it's really hard to know, what the right formula is
Yeah.
for successful survivors or for people to return and be healthier and happier, maybe even than before. And I often struggle as to sort of what the right recipe is. And I know there's a need, but I'm just trying to match the need with the right set of resources. And it's not easily described in the literature, right? You can't open UpToDate necessarily, one of our medical resources, and find, okay, yeah, at week 3 you do this, and at week 6 you do this, and make sure you have these 3 types of special. It doesn't exist, and it's not likely that the evidence is ever going to line up in that type of formulaic way. So I just am interested in hearing from different people, survivors, about what has been important for their recovery. So thank you.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. I
And
think
you,
it's having something to read, having somebody to talk to, and having somebody sort of listen and understand your story. Um, those are critical pieces. You can build a lot from that, but I agree that, at month 6 or month 7, I think that's very, very difficult. But having those options for people, I think it certainly was extremely helpful for me.
And I think, Michael, you and your work on the HeartSite project, and I was really glad that you brought that up. I think that that project is just tremendous. And we actually interviewed Dr. Agarwal a few months ago on
Yeah.
this webinar. So that's available on the YouTube channel for those that weren't able to see it. It's really fantastic. He is taking an evidence-based approach and trying to understand some of what works post-arrest, right? And trying to answer some of Tom's questions. It's a long road to figure it out, but it is the first steps towards figuring this out in a scientific way, which is super cool and just a wonderful speaker. So really appreciate you being involved with them and helping them out and trying to figure it out. One question in the chat: what was the final diagnosis? You had clear coronary arteries. You had, yeah, exactly.
I, I just joke, I joke with solar flare. I mean, I really, there's
Solar flare.
nothing.
I like it. We'll take it.
I mean, they did like 100 gene, panel to look for any potential anomalies, and that all
Nothing.
came back normal.
There is the 2 years you spent at Purdue. That could be
That
part of what
maybe
was
that
that.
was it.
That could be okay.
That maybe that
We'll
was
leave
it.
that alone.
So I did have PVCs. I still have PVCs,
Oh,
but they were never symptomatic. They would sort of show
yeah,
up when heart was at rest. Actually, when I was playing around with like a life pack at physio, one of the kind of the nurses was like, "Hey, you have this thing," and I was like, "Oh, I didn't know that." But it was never, again, it's not uncommon.
yeah,
That's kind of the only thing if you look at the kind of the medical history that you go, maybe, but otherwise structural blockages, all, yeah, solar flare.
solar flare. We'll take it. How has your event, the aftermath, everything you've gone through, changed your view of the work you did before all this? Right? Because you were very involved in
Yeah.
resuscitation, but as just a young guy who's trying to help
Yeah.
move products and do some good work. But I think your view's probably different now, and I'm kind of curious how that's changed.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly, again, when work has true meaning and purpose, it becomes less work, right? It
Hmm.
becomes more of a kind of a life mission thing. And so I'm really glad I spent that time there. To be honest with you, I miss working in, kind of dedicated healthcare. I work for a consulting firm now. We work with a lot of tech clients, and we help, do business transformation and kind of help business run smoother and faster and more efficient and strategy things. But I'm not sort of in the, kind of helping develop the next Lucas, or,
Yeah.
helping optimize what does, CodeSat or LifeNet or whatever look like. So I certainly miss those things, but if, I can't go back in time, but I'm happy that I have that experience because it helped me I think in the recovery as well to understand more of the details. Again, Tom, to your point about resources, I could get overloaded with trying to look up cardiac arrest and what happened and all of this, that I at least had a good foundation for understanding resuscitation and outcomes, and what is Utstein? Why does that matter? Witness, like, having some context, you know help me personally sort of, yeah, heal and grow from that, having had the professional experience. And yeah, maybe my life will take me back to that, and I certainly miss that impact purpose
Yeah.
thing that certainly everybody on this call experiences to a much larger extent than I do from a consulting standpoint.
Yeah, that's yep, I think that's really, really important. Well, Michael, I want to thank you. Your story is amazing as always, and you've helped strengthen our system here locally, and you've influenced a number of others, a large number of others around the country and around the world to continue to improve their systems, and really just a tremendous offering that you've made to improve the community of resuscitation. And thank you so much for joining us and showing that you can, that people go back and they
Yeah.
live a life and they get married to the person who saved them, and you waited far too long, brother, far too long for that wonderful woman. Anyway,
Every day's a lesson.
and have a baby and go back to work and go to some hockey games and even strap the skates on and really do an awesome job. So I really, really, really awesome work. Thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you for all of your help with us at the Resuscitation Academy. Michael's been one of our leads in redesigning the website. So if you haven't been to resuscitationacademy.org recently, it looks sparkly and brand new and has that new car smell even. I don't know how you made that happen, but it smells like a new car. It looks fantastic. So we're going to continue iterating on it a little bit and continue adding resources that hopefully everybody on this webinar will get something out of and really enjoy. And just really great to have you. Thank you so much. And we'll wrap it up here. We'll be back again next month with another Resuscitation Academy webinar. We're super excited building out the calendar for this year. So if you have any exciting ideas, feel free to reach out. But we've got a bunch of good stuff coming and it should be really, really fun year. So thanks again, Michael. We'll see you soon. See you in a few weeks at the next RA, I'm sure. And love to talk to you anytime. Thanks again.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks, everybody. Bye.